Good evening. My name is Randy, Star Thinker, and I just watched the live chat again and it just put some ideas in my head. In fact, I didn't even finish it because there's a point where I had to leave for work, and so I always miss about a half hour of it. But it did have some interesting points and some points I hadn't considered before. I'm going to pull up the poem here. I'm at work, but I'm waiting for like 6 computers to download huge updates. So there's not much I can do right now. And so the main point of tonight's discussion was like the first part of the poem. And before I get into this, I just want to reiterate something I reiterate on all my other things is that don't take what I'm saying as gospel truth. It's my opinion. I get things wrong. I don't care. So, now, some people point out, like, you're wrong on this. If it's an opinion, if I say, well, my solve is in Montana, and someone says you're wrong, that's fine. That's your opinion because no one knows who's right or who's wrong until someone's got the test in their hand. And so I take those with a grain of salt. If someone says, if I say something like, oh, in this interview, Forrest said this, and someone said, well, you're wrong, then I'll be like, yeah, okay, I might be wrong there. But again, it's just me making mistakes. So I take it with a grain of salt and don't take what I say as gospel truth. But there's 2 points I want to make before I start talking. And one is I have this weird pathological sense that everywhere I look is codes. Now, I used to live in England and I visited a lot of castles, a lot of cathedrals, and a lot of churches. And because I love this architecture, I love the medieval architecture. I love that whole Baroque feel of being in a castle. And a lot of times you go in, and if it's well kept, you can look and you can see like, oh, look where this design is, where the ceiling meets the wall. Look at the design in the tiles. Look at the design in the mosaic. And usually it's beautiful. It's well thought out. It's done by masons and fine artists and stuff, and it's nice. And other times I'll go in and I'll look, and it's just like I said, this is almost like a pathological mental state that I'm always in. But I'll look and I'll be like, there's not a pattern there. This room has these tiles, this room has these tiles, but this room has the tiles, but there's not a pattern. It's more random. And every time I see that, the first thought that pops into my head is there's a code there. And this happens to me like all the time. And so whenever I see something, first I look for the pattern, and second I look for, if it's not a pattern, could it be something hidden? And it's not just patterns within patterns, but like one of a good example is the whistle pig. And I've done a lot of writing, and a lot of paragraphs starts with the and it's and him, and this is how it started. There's certain words that start paragraphs. So when you read the whistle pig, there's a chapter where each paragraph starts with a different letter. And that pops into your, at least in mine, it popped into my head like something's wrong here, something's not right. That's not the pattern you expect. And of course, we all know in the whistle pig there's a code in the first letters of the sentences. But that's the kind of thing that I would spot and immediately think, well, that's not right. Another really good example of this, now I don't know how many of you remember the sequel to A Treasure Trove was called The Secret of the Alchemist Dar. In the back of the book, there's what's called the big block of code, and it's a big block of code. And people have spent all kinds of time going through it. No one solved anything. But I spotted something, and at the time I kept saying this in chat rooms and forums, and I don't know if no one believed me or no one spotted the same thing, but there's all kinds, there's dots, there's half moons, there's crescents, there's lines and stuff. But what I noticed is the small dots never were above each other. So if you look through it, there's big dots. They're above and below each other. There's circles that were above and below each other, lines that were above and below each other. But if it was a colored in dot, it never was in a spot where it was above and below something. And to me, that really stood out because every single other symbol in that big block of code, there were points where they were stacked, but not the circles. So to me, and I even went so far as to create, I scanned the page and I erased everything but the dots. And it just, when you look at it that way, you're like, this is a code. And, of course, at the time the book went bankrupt and stuff, and so I never followed up on it. But I'm certain that has something to do with it. And those are the kind of things I spot. And following, when you go through codes, another thing I spot is, when you're reading armchair treasure hunt books and stuff like that, and there's a code there, so you're looking for something. Now, if you're not looking for something, chances are you might not spot it. You might, someone like me, like I said, I'm pathological about it. I will spot something that's out of the ordinary, but if you're not looking for it, you might not spot it. That's the whole, steganography is like my hobby, so I do this all the time. But the point I'm trying to make is grammar plays into this too. There's patterns in grammar. If I say I'm going to the store, and I, living in Europe, that there's different languages that group their pattern in different groups. So they might say, to the store I'm going. So if I heard either one of those phrases, to the store I'm going to the store, it wouldn't faze me. It wouldn't trigger anything. But if someone said, the where as to where I'm going is the store, you'd be like, what? Nobody talks like that. Nobody says that kind of thing. I'm going to where the store is where it is, and that's where I'm going. If someone like phrases it really out of the ordinary, especially in writing, especially if you're looking for clues, to me, that's forcing something. You forced things into a sentence because you needed a certain outcome. So whenever I'm reading a book and I know that there's codes in it and I'm looking and my brain is active, I'll spot like odd grammar, because grammar is a pattern. It's a pattern in language. So if there's odd grammar, to me, that's someone tried to fit something into that. And so when I look at this, let's see if I can zoom in on it so I can read it easier. Now keep in mind, I'm sitting at my desk and my computer screens are way up here. So if I'm looking up, I'm looking at my computer screens. So as I've gone alone in there and with my treasures bold, I can keep my secret where and hint of riches new and old. Now, the thing is, and this wasn't mentioned in the live chat, and I was at a point where I was driving and stuff. I'm like, why isn't anyone catching this? That third line, I can keep my secret where, is not a complete sentence. It's not proper grammar. I can, if I said, if I took my rock and I said, I can keep my rock where, people are going to be like, yeah, where? Where are you going to keep it? I'm going to keep my rock where no one will find it. I'm going to keep my rock where it's easy to see. I'm going to keep my rock where, there's got to be a follow-up to that. You don't just say, I'm going to keep my rock where. It's like, that's not a complete sentence. If it's a question, it could be a complete sentence. I'm going to keep my rock where? That's a question. Okay? It's completed. But just saying, I can keep my secret where, I mean, even when you add it to the rest of the stanza, it doesn't make sense. As I've gone alone in there and with my treasures bold, and I agree with the guy that said that's 2 trips, and that was something I thought of earlier, and when he said that, it didn't even occur to me that, you could see that in a different way. But I have gone alone in there and with my treasures bold. I've gone alone in there, and I've gone in there with my treasures. So it's like 2 trips. But yeah, that could be a single trip. I've gone alone in there, and with my treasures bold. Again, that's not the kind of grammar, I don't know, it doesn't fit in my mind. And I can keep my secrets where, and hint of riches new and old. The other thing I wanted to scream at the screen was, hint in this context is not a noun. If I said I have a hint, I have a hint. If I have the hint. If I have Bob's hint, hint in order to be a noun needs a qualifier. But in this sentence, and hint of riches new and old, you're hinting. It's a verb. I'm going to hint of riches new and old. So to me, that's not a noun, it's a verb. I can keep my secrets where, again, not complete, and hint of riches new and old, which means, and, let's see, what's another word for hint? And suggest my hitch, and suggestive riches new and old. It's a verb. I don't see that as a noun at all. You could say, yeah, there is a hint of riches, but it's a hint of riches, not and hint of riches. So to me, that's a verb. So this whole first stanza grammatically doesn't make sense to me. And to me, that triggered my code breaking brain. I'm like, like I said, when you force grammar into certain areas, and there's leeway when you're dealing with a poem because you're making rhymes and you're making, you got to fit the pentameter and all that good stuff. But to me, that second line is not complete, and the third line is describing an action. They're hinting of their riches new and old. They're hinting of riches new and old. Not necessarily there. Don't take that. And hint of riches new and old. So he's going. I go alone in there. Now, another thing, I studied English under the poet laureate of the state of Illinois, and so we talked poetry a lot. That was sort of my mentor, and so as I've gone alone in there, and one of the things they taught me was rearrange your sentences to see if they still make sense. So as I've gone alone in there, I don't know, I can't even make sense of it. As I've gone alone in there, I can keep my secret where, and again, that's an incomplete thought. As I've gone alone in there and hint of riches new and old, so you can go in there and hint of riches, and with my treasure bold and hint of riches new and old, you can mix and match it, and some of it makes sense, but then when you add that incomplete sentence, I can keep my secret where what? It doesn't, it's not a complete sentence. And hint of riches new and old, that means that's his action he's taken. He went alone in there, and he's hinting of riches new and old. The other thing they picked apart was, S, treasures have an S. I don't know about that. I mean, like, it's one chest, it's one treasure. So when he went alone in there and with his treasures bold, treasures could be memories. Treasures could be, what's the poem? It's like Wadsworth. My treasures are the earth and sky. So not necessarily something you own, but and with my treasures bold. So yeah, I'm seeing two different lines there. As I went alone in there, and as a lonely hiker, I've hiked alone a lot, and sure, I've gone alone. And with my treasures bold, if I have a purpose, I might hike and I'm just kind of hiking and I'm being meek and I'm hiking. But if I have a purpose, I might be standing up and marching and, I'm going to be bold. So yeah, I've gone alone in there, and with my treasures, I was bold going in there. And I can keep my secret where, again, unless that's a question, it doesn't make sense. And I can keep my secrets where, and hint of riches new and old. And I know people say grammatically that he's saying I can keep my secrets where he has gone in there. But again, if this guy spent 15 years on this poem, this guy, I mean Forrest Fenn, if you could, if he spent 15 years on this poem, I just feel like that's forced. It's really weird. The rest of it, that's where the clues supposedly start. Begin at where warm waters halt. Again, begin it, and we're getting into the whole warm waters halt thing, and I have my own opinions about that. But the rest of it, and someone likened it to directions to a cottage. Now, the very first time I went to the Lost Creek trailhead, I didn't have instructions that said take road B231 to B271, turn left. My instructions were drive on this road till you come to a Y, take the left Y, drive on that road till you come to a T intersection, and you're going to turn right at the T intersection. And they didn't tell me, like, 4 to 5 miles on this road, 6 to 10 miles on this road. And also, when you're driving on these mountain roads, you're driving at like 20, 30 miles an hour, which makes it seem a lot longer than it is. But the instructions, the next clues, and he said people walk right by him, and people have gotten to the first two and walked right by the chests. And, and I can't remember who said what in the chat, but someone made the mention that at some point he might have said that you can't get to the treasure without going through the clues. So it's like, to me, that's like a straight line, and you're passing all these things along the way. Like if I knew right where the treasure was, and I walked there, and I pulled my car in a parking lot, and I got out and I walked there, I think you can't do that without passing the clues, whether you do it intentionally or unintentionally. It's like when I walk down the hallway of where I work here, I'm going to walk past the bathroom, and then I'm going to walk past the break room, and then I'm going to walk past the offices. So if I wrote a poem that said walk past the bathroom, walk past the break room, walk past the offices, and you have to anyway, and that's how I see how the poem is. If you knew exactly where it was and you got out of your car and you walked to it without looking for clues, I think you're going to walk past all these anyway. So yeah, it is one long shot. It is like one straight, no, not a straight line, but it's one continuous movement where you're passing all these clues. And I also believe that you can't retroactively, back the clues in. I know I did what probably a lot of people did and looked up Home of Brown. Because, when I lived in Denver, I lived down the street from the Molly Brown house, and, that's a Home of Brown. Not that that's anything to do with this, but, if I started with Home of Brown and then went, okay, is there a canyon up? And, is there a place where warm waters start, because you're going backwards. But I just don't see Home of Brown. Now, granted, he did this a long time ago, and at the time there might not have been Google Maps, there might not have been the satellite imagery, so maybe you can. Now, I've gone to where I thought where warm waters halt on Google Maps, and I've gone into the Street View, and just I know, like in my hometown, just a few years ago, there was only one street that was on Street View. And now a couple years later, almost all of the streets are on Street View. So they're updating it constantly. So if I go to where warm waters halt, where I think it halts, and I go into Street View, and then I literally walk down the street. And then I was looking for a Home of Brown. So maybe you could do it that way. But I don't think I could pull out like a map of Montana and look for a Home of Brown, or Google someone named Brown and look for their home and then look for a warm waters halt. I think you actually have to start at the beginning, and as you walk towards the treasure, you're going to walk past something that is a Home of Brown. And but I don't think you're going to find, and it might be something that we're not thinking of. When you say a Home of Brown, you're thinking of a structure, and I know he said no structures, but you think of a home, you think of a house. But a Home of Brown, is a beaver den. Is that a structure? What else did I consider Home of Brown to be? Like, Home of Brown, I don't know, that could mean a forest. It could mean so many things. Home of where the bark is, a place where you stack wood. Again, you're getting into, is it a structure? Is it something metaphorical? But I don't think you're going to find Home of Brown specifically on a map. You might find it like I said, nowadays with the satellite imagery, you might look and see something and say, hey, that might be the Home of Brown. But I think it would be easier to find where warm waters halt and then pass the home of brown on your way to the other clues. Um, but yeah, this odd phrasing, like I said, that's triggered something in me from the beginning. It's just like, is there a code there? And I know there's ways of sliding the lines and making try the wheel. But as I've said before, and I think I said this privately, so it might not have gotten out there, but to me, a code has to have the same rules for every letter. So if my rule is A equals 7, A is always going to equal 7, no matter what in my code. If somewhere in my code A equals 8, then I didn't form the code properly, or if I'm trying to solve it, I'm not solving it properly. Because you can't mix and match what you want it to be. So yeah, and I've heard people say, well, you could slide the lines and make anything. Again, kind of on the fence, because there was a logical reason why they slid the lines where they did, but it wasn't the same for each line. And to me, that's a stretch. I'm saying if there's going to be a reason you slide a line, then that same reason has to apply to the next line and the next line and the next line. You can't change the reasoning. You can't change the code line per line. It just doesn't work that way. It would be unsolvable if you changed the rule for every letter, for every line. It would become unsolvable. And at that point, if you have a solve and each line doesn't follow the same rules, then you probably use bias. You probably made you made something out of nothing. So I think that covers about what I wanted to cover today. I actually made notes when I was listening. When I'm on call, I have to carry a notepad with me. So when someone calls me, I have to write down their number and what the problem was. Anyway, I did have a note on here, and I'm not sure what I was referring to, but I think I was referring to the fact that, like codes, when you solve a code, there's kind of a minimum you need to have to solve a code. And so like, I have a code that's been on my webpage forever, and my webpage was designed for me to reference if I had to reference someone. So it's not a webpage that I designed for people to visit to learn things. So at the time I made it, I did do some Alchemist Star. I'm not going to say what my webpage is. I did lose my webpage, and they wanted $7,000 for me to renew it. So my new webpage is just has a different. It's not .com. It's .me. So that was the closest thing I could find that would make sense for just my own webpage is .me. But anyway, I have some codes on there. One is really short. It's only a couple letters long, and I know I didn't write that for people to solve. I wrote it for just kind of fun. But if someone were to try to solve it, there's just not enough there to solve it. It's like the Tom and Shude case, where there's a really short code. It's only a couple characters, and it's like, that's really not enough characters to solve a code. And again, this poem is really short, so it's not a lot to go on. So unless something makes sense somewhere. I was toying with the idea to buy his book. I went to the website and I tried to put it in the cart. It wasn't working for me, and I don't know. And like $35 for a book, that just seems really steep to me. And but I'm toying with the idea to buy the book. I keep hearing people say, "Oh, hints are in the book. Hints are in the books. Let's refer to this chapter. Let's refer to this chapter." But I live on a shoestring budget, so $35 for a book, maybe when I get my taxes or something. And of course, I'm a poem purist, so I'm not supposed to read the book, but that doesn't mean what you think it means. So I do believe that, like, if you just had the code, you could solve it. But again, if I'm a meat purist and I'm only going to eat meat, and someone puts a plate of meat and potatoes in front of me, why not eat the potatoes? I'm still a meat purist, but sure, I'll eat the potatoes too. Why not? So you have the clues in the poem. If you got hints, sure, use them. I'm using them. I there are things that I consider that are from interviews and stuff. So But I do believe that if I hadn't heard any of the interviews, or if I hadn't read the book or seen any of these YouTube videos or other people's opinions, you could still solve it with just the poem. And I think whoever finds the chest, I don't really hold up high hopes that it's going to be me, but whoever finds the chest, and they hopefully they'll tell you how they found it, you'll see that it's all in the poem. So at least that's my belief. So, but again, just the meat of what I'm saying was, yeah, there's certain parts of these that just seem forced. The grammar's not right in the poem. I'm just wondering if there is some kind of underlying code there, if there is something. When you read the poem and, he says he spent 15 years on it, I just can't see that. I really can't see where 15 years went into making this. Unless he had to make sure very specific things fit very specific things, and it's something in the number of letters, the number of words, and the number of, the number of synonyms, making, if you rewrote the poem using nothing but synonyms, you might come out with something else. And I know he said don't mess with the poem, but how do you fit 15 years into this poem? I just don't see it. But anyway, there's a lot more to that. I know, okay, he had this, supposedly he knew where he was going to hide the chest years before he hit it, and he wrote the poem, some say before or after, what stanza did he write first? There's a lot more to it, but to me, I just can't see 15 years. I don't think hint is a noun. That third line isn't complete. there's just a lot going on there. But anyway, my opinion, I'm Randy, Star Thinker. I hate the fact that every YouTube video says subscribe and like. I mean, it happens so much that I don't even notice it anymore, but it's there. So I'll never say that. I'm not a channel that's trying to make money. I'm not trying to become famous. This is just my opinion. But I will say, hey, go to Amazon and look up my name, Randy Pischel. You'll see some of my books on there. 4 shorts. I actually won an award for one of those stories in 4 shorts. Rebecca's Lament. There's a long story behind that book, and it starts out rough, and it gets really deep later on. And I know people have read it, and they've said, you made me look at the world in a whole new way after I read that book. And so there's some interesting things on there, but my big one is 3 Men in a Tub, and right up there, I keep a copy up there, the Beacon Star. So, in fact, I keep both of them up there. But anyway, this is Randy. I'm at work. My updates are still running, so I got about 5 more minutes. But I'm going to sign off, get this uploaded. Thanks.